Hello everyone. My title slide for my presentation should explain who I am and the title of the paper that I'm about to share with you. I'm sorry that I'm not able to be there in a truly embodied sense, and I hope that this recording will make a positive contribution to our conference and to your discussions, and I look forward to hearing what comes out of the discussions. The paper that I'm about to essentially read to you is organised into 3 parts. I hope that each part will build on the preceding one, and I also hope that it will raise an interesting perspective or two to add to the discussions. I have aimed to produce a theoretical paper, as this is what I was asked to do, and I will, through the paper, make reference to the older person, partly because I was requested to do this and partly because it's my practice passion. And I believe that older people have a lot to teach us because they're living at the edge of life and they test out how closely or not we live our values and beliefs about persons and person-centred caring. In addition, I'm also working on a broader theoretical paper trying to develop a more person-centred and embodied understanding of wander walking to offer some sort of alternative perspective to the ones that I see present in a lot of current nursing and healthcare literature, which are usually behaviourally located and I feel quite limited. Now, just to set the scene, I think that we could be wrong, or maybe we still have a long way to go exploring our understandings of persons in the world. But I state that any claim or propositions by me today may need to be revised or withdrawn in terms of your discussions or new evidence or argument in the future. Our interpretations, our evaluations and re-evaluations are temporarily situated and subject to the flux of historical and cultural changes. Of course, absolute certainty about knowledge is impossible. Empirical knowledge can be revised by further observation, and any of the things that we take as knowledge today can turn out to be false. I'd like to briefly make use of the example of the vampire to illustrate this point. As you'll see on slide 3, I have prepared a nice collection of photographs for you. The vampire, as portrayed in centuries of literature and more recently in film and on TV, has been an entity of loathing and something that's absolutely anti-human. Portrayed as the opposite of life, of goodness and beauty, for it is a creature, has been far removed from being a person. But gradually the vampire has evolved and is becoming much more mainstream. It's got in touch with its deeply buried human attributes, excuse the pun. Now the vampire is a non-human person, capable of insight, some sympathy, superhuman strengths, and is campaigning for equal rights and for citizenship. Apparently we all want one, or we all want to be one. But more seriously, there are current debates about whether the category of person may be taken to include non-human entities, for example robots, cyborgs and corporate organisations. I hope that this illustration just sets the scene a bit to discuss an overview of our current understandings of what it means to be a person and what the notion of personhood means. And it will also allow me to make some remarks about why I feel there are some limitations and some potential problems for nursing that we need to address. And by addressing them, I hope that we are looking towards finding common threads of connection to look at what we have in common across our different understandings rather than focusing on some of our differences. So in terms of current understandings of person, whatever paradigm of nursing individuals choose to ascribe to, for example humanistic caring, relationship-centred caring, person-centred caring, defining the person is pivotal. And to begin with, as I've already alluded, we need to look outside of nursing and outside of our own narrow fields to help us understand why we need to be clear and achieve a shared understanding. The first philosophical system to use the word person, it appears to be Christianity, as you'll see from slide 4. However, the related term persona preceded this term and notion and was alive and well in Latin and Greek language and culture, although specifically used as a legal and a theatrical term. It became altered with Christianity to a term with a clear technical theological meaning and was used to distinguish the three persons of the Trinity. It is now, in the westernised world at least, generally accepted that a person is a human being with certain capabilities or attributes, and collectively these are often known as personhood. And they are still usually defined within a moral and a legal context. Such personhood, or the attributes, according to Taylor, include agency, self-awareness, a notion of the past and the future, and the possession and ability to act out certain sets of rights and duties or responsibilities. Following the Lockean position, not all humans can be persons. Not everyone can have agency, not everyone has self-awareness, or even a notion of the past or the future. And Singer famously defined a person as a conscious thinking being which knows that it's a person. And he used the example that some non-humans are more entitled to personhood than other humans, and he specifically drew on the example of older people with Alzheimer's. Globally, of course, we continue to see that many people, often women and children, and people subjected to human trafficking and slavery amongst other things, do not have the same rights as others. All of this, of course, has huge implications for healthcare and for nursing practice globally. All the functional definitions drawn from the Lockean position, whereby a person is one who is capable of rationality and self-consciousness, are problematic for nursing for several reasons. Or so I believe. I want to set out 3 problems or limitations, briefly. And these problems are probably both ontological and epistemological. The primary argument, of course, is that functional definitions do not even begin to tap into the depth and the breadth of what it is to be a person, or the sufficient or necessary conditions for personhood. They fail to capture the full meaning and the true essence of a person, or fail to capture the moral status and the protection from harm that vulnerable persons need. I believe that the functions of a human being do not make her or him a person. A person does not come into existence simply because certain functions can be demonstrated or attained. Rather, she or he is a person and therefore exhibits certain functions, which is almost coincidental. This means being a person is a moral status rather than a set of functions. Being this simple and this clear is necessary to avoid arguments about which of us is superior to the other, which of us is more of a person than the other. For example, older people and people living with dementia are lesser persons within some sets of arguments. And we can see in terms of social policy, healthcare policy, where this can lead for certain groups of people. The person who comes the closest to making this moral status argument clear is, in my view, the theologian Tom Kitwood, who, of course, is most closely associated with dementia care. Kitwood argues that personhood is a social relationship status bestowed on one human being by another. He grounds this status as an absolute moral right. However, he does get drawn into the functional attribute debate, although to a lesser degree. He situates personhood as being solely dependent on sentience rather than on rationality or logic or other cognitive functions. Thus, persons are sentient beings. It's important here to note that sentience refers to the quality or state of being aware and the readiness to perceive feeling rather than thought, and it does not or should not be taken to mean the feeling of emotions. The second problem or limitation, I feel, is that most explanations of person and personhood are inherently embedded within the traditional framework of Cartesian duality. And some of them are also embedded in the notion of singularity, or singletonhood, as Overall calls it. Singletonhood which could be the title for a new TV series, very much locates personhood within a singular physical body. There are not many human beings who share a physical body, apart from conjoined twins. But this is still an interesting notion to consider. Both notions, of course, limit the possibilities and disadvantage and even exclude certain persons immediately. Feminists, for example, have given a great deal of attention to the differences between the value of different bodies, whether that's gender-based, race-based, culturally based, and in other circumstances, and the relationships between different bodies and between power and oppression. And the third limitation, in my view, is attached to the notion of situated embodiment. Because of the lack of attention to embodiment around our understanding of person and personhood, there is a consequent failure to overlook the influence of place or space and time, and I will expand on these in the next section. But just drawing on slide 5, and in summary, the concept of a person is very difficult to define in a way that is universally accepted due to historical and cultural variability, the controversies surrounding its use in some contexts and with some groups of people, and also, more recently, because of technological advances. Depending on the context, the theory or the definition, the category of person at this point in time may be taken to include non-human entities, including large corporations, vampires, animals, artificial intelligences, or even extraterrestrial life, whilst at the same time excluding some human entities, those in early fetal development or those with extreme mental and cognitive impairments or injuries. There seems to be something inherently problematic in this, that we haven't progressed beyond these points. So I conclude that we in nursing need to proceed with great caution about our conceptual terminology and the foundations on which we base a lot of our frameworks, whether in practice, education, research or policy. I just want to move on to part 2 now and try to extend some of our understanding of person through the notion of embodiment and something called the 4 existentials. If we presume persons are for the most singular beings, then the singularity of personhood is tied up with the body in some sort of way, and therefore connected with embodiment. Harry argues that emotional displays are embodied expressions of rationality, that sentience or the readiness to perceive feelings, or the felt sense, as Gelding puts it, is necessary for rationality. Damasio, of course, has been primary in leading theoretical developments about the relationship between sentience and rationality. And he argues that rationality, or higher level cognition, stems from emotion rather than the other way around. He also argues that emotion stems from bodily senses, and this is vital to make the link between embodiment and personhood or persons. Damasio